Is Federica Felisatti. I am an architect and I am the assistant project manager for the Urban Regeneration for Historic Cairo project, managed in Paris in the World Heritage Center. This project, I will brief you. I will make an intervention talking about the project, and then I will leave the word to Tamara to talk about the historic urban landscape. So the project was set in 2010. July 2010, and is a project that is helping the Egyptian government, is in support to the Egyptian government for the implementation of the operational guidelines to the World Heritage Convention for the site of Historic Cairo. Historic Cairo was listed in 1979, and originally it was inscribed as Islamic Cairo. The nomination file that you can find in the website of the World Heritage Center under the chapter of Historic Cairo in the list of World Heritage properties. It talks about, it lists the property for its absolutely unquestionable historical, archaeological and urban importance. And I will stress particularly today on this latest aspect. Historic Cairo, originally listed as Islamic Cairo, is an historic city. It's not monuments, it's not an ensemble of monuments, it's a city, a living city. As you might all know, the sites are inscribed in the World Heritage List according to several criteria. The cultural site, according to can be chosen among 8 criteria, and then the natural site, they have their own criteria of choosing. Cairo was listed according to 3 criteria. The first one to represent a unique or aesthetic achievement, a masterpiece of human creative genius. And within this chapter, we have listed several peculiar monuments or peculiar manufactures that are in Cairo. The second, which is the most important, to be a characteristic example of a significant traditional style of architecture, method of construction, or form of town planning or traditional human settlement that is fragile by nature or are some vulnerable under the impact of irreversible social, cultural, or economic change. And these embrace a wider concept, the one which I will not stop to stress on, that is an historic city, which means we are talking of buildings where the people live, we are talking of shops, commerce, markets, streets. Particularly Cairo is outstanding. Why? It's an outstanding example of integrated urban fabric, which means that the city developed through centuries, and the layers of this transformation have left traces in the city, creating a very heterogeneous historic urban landscape that have traces of every single step of the history of it. Historic Cairo is a unique settlement resulting by the ensemble of traces of consequent urban pattern, from 100 AD through the Roman fortress of Babylon and the Coptic quarter to the early Islamic city. You might recognize here in this map, you have the the old Cairo and the Fustat area. And then you know better than me that the city developed through several settlements until it reached the Fatimid nucleus, and then it was embraced in one sole city. And so you still have the traces of the Roman settlements, you still have traces of each and any of this period in one sole city, in one urban environment. Not only, Cairo witnessed a remarkable change on the second half of the 19th century with the birth of modern Cairo. The modernization of the city was possible thanks to the control of the waters of the River Nile, because as you might know, before, the whole area that now is downtown Cairo was regularly flooded by the water of the Nile. So the modernization and the control of the river allowed a further transformation of a modern city that grew on the side of the older one, and it merged with it, creating an even more heterogeneous urban landscape. Last but not least, a very important aspect that characterizes historic city, its living aspect, be most importantly associated with ideas or beliefs, with events or with persons of outstanding historical importance or significance. Cairo has always been a strategic, political, intellectual, commercial pole. We are now in the heart of it, the market of Khan el-Khalili, the University of Al-Azhar, what it represented for the religious and for the cultural world. Not only there are mausoleums and you have a particular form of cemeteries that are inhabited, which is a unique characteristic for the city, and the pilgrimage associated to mausoleums, to cemeteries, the way of living the space, the way of accessing the space in the historic city. The city intangible heritage is made by this traditional belief, religious belief, the mullet, the festival procession, the storytelling tradition, and very important is the handicraft. Again, we are in the hub of a lot of workshops of craftsmen that still nowadays have an outstanding way of working the wood, of working the leather, of working the metal. These are all very important aspects that should be embraced, and that differ, for example, for the single monument on its own, because they keep the space of the city alive. They have an economic impact on the place. They allow people to live and to work still in an historic city, avoiding to create an open-air museum, but allowing the historic city to be part of a greater city and to develop with it. As we were saying before, Cairo was listed in 1979, and originally associated to the nomination file, there was this sketch that you see on the side, identifying 5 major zones. You have to know that also UNESCO had a development in history, and also the World Heritage List had a development in history. Therefore, at the beginning, when the list started, there were no regular criteria for the state party to inscribe their site. I mean, there were criteria to inscribe the site, but there was no common documentation to certify the state of the site, its aspect, the value for which it was stated. These occurred later on thanks to the operational guidelines to the World Heritage Convention, which works like an executive law on a law. So it articulates the treaty of the World Heritage Convention, and it explains in practical terms, is a support to the states that have sites inscribed on the World Heritage List, because it supports by telling how to monitor the site, which documents to produce to have the site inscribed in the World Heritage List. Every site requires a map that identifies the boundaries of it, of the core area and of a buffer zone that is a zone that protects the accessibility to the site, the views to the site, the integrity of the site. Cairo being inscribed so early, it was one of the first sites inscribed on the list, didn't have all this documentation that nowadays is required. And that is where UNESCO started to support the government for the production of this documentation. And that is where also we started. Indeed, Cairo had a lack of clear geographical definition of the site, and what is even worse is that it is not necessarily only to have a map on its own. It is necessarily to have protection measures associated to the map. You understand that a gentleman X, Y, that lives in the historic city, that goes to his governorate and asks for a building permit, but his house relies within a perimeter that is a World Heritage site, how does the government behave if it has only a map that tells that that house of this gentleman is within the boundaries, but there is no clear protection measure associated, which measure does the government will apply? Will it say like, yes, you are allowed to increase the height of your building, or no? So that is also a very important factor, to have protection measures associated to the boundary of the World Heritage Site. And that, as a matter of fact, these two pictures on the bottom shows an ongoing intervention that was later on stopped in what it was called originally the buffer zone of the site. On the side of the citadel of Saladin, it was proposed a business center with consistent height, for example. Originally, the 5 zones that we saw identified in the sketch, we tried to locate them on a more updated map that we received from CAPMAS. And you can see Al Fustat area, Ibn Tulun and this surrounding at number 2, the citadel and the surrounding Mamluk palaces at number 3, the Fatimid nucleus where we are now at number 4, and very important, as I was mentioning before, the necropolis, which represent an outstanding, unique aspect of this city. What is the story briefly of the site before we arrived? So international missions and experts sent by the World Heritage Committee and the World Heritage Center encouraged the Egyptian government to formalize at least a map with a delimitation of the site, and they encouraged to strengthen the coordination among institutions for the protection of the site, because we are talking of a city, so there are several actors involved. Whoever issued the building permit or the demolition decree. By the Egyptian law, by the building law, there is a body within the Ministry of Culture called National Organization for Urban Harmony, which is entitled to identify area of peculiar value, historic areas of peculiar value, and to assign protection measures to these areas. So UNESCO was encouraging the Egyptian government to have an interaction between institutions. In 1992 happened an earthquake, a considerable earthquake, and ICOMOS sent a monitoring mission, and an important symposium was held in Cairo with the participation of several actors. Several guidelines were issued, but no follow-up happened, no submission happened to the World Heritage Center. In 2005 were drafted the operational guidelines I was mentioning before, and therefore it became compulsory at this point to have boundaries, management tools, and conservation tools for every site inscribed in the World Heritage List. In 2007 occurred an important change for the site of Historic Cairo. The name changed from Islamic Cairo into Historic Cairo. This to embrace all the period that were actually mentioned in the nomination file in the beginning in 1979. The nomination file for a site is almost his identity card. It is a very important legal document, and it is a reference to refer to for any step. Whatever was mentioned in the nomination file is whatever needs to be protected for a World Heritage Site. In 2007, the government of Egypt made a submission to UNESCO of a hypothetical core area and buffer zone. This was not, what is the problem? It is not solved, the problem with this submission. Why? Because this map is not associated to protection measures, so we are at point 1. And the second major problem is that this map was drafted on the very famous map of 1948 for the monuments, where several urban features that are present nowadays in the city, like Salah Salem Street, which pass really close to the citadel and really close to the site, actually cutting part of the site, the cemetery, from the rest, were not present on this map. So it is not sufficient as a boundary, or it is not completely portraying what the nomination file was stating. Tamara will explain later on this new concept of historic urban landscape to which Cairo belongs in a certain extent. And that is where we have to work on, in the sense that, again, Cairo is not an ensemble of monuments, it's an historic city. In 2008, there was a very important mission of UNESCO where, along with the government, a few recommendations were set clearly written. The preparation of a management plan and the preparation of a conservation plan for the World Heritage property. And that is where we entered in the picture, because in 2010 we launched this project of urban regeneration for Historic Cairo to assist the Egyptian institution for the production of these documents. So our main goal was to outline a conservation rehabilitation strategy and to establish a management system to the World Heritage Site, which, in simpler words said, to protect the site with a plan, to have another plan which is different that help and follow the use of the city, the life of the city, how to manage the city. More in detail, we have with us, we will bring after a series of reports that outline the first part of the project, the first years of the project, and where all our targets are clearly written, just for you to know that the conservation and rehabilitation strategy we were mentioning requires a clear definition of what is the World Heritage Site and what are the buffer zones. And it needs to know what are the heritage values that are present in the area to work to regenerate the physical, socio-economic environment. And the management system, as I was mentioning before, needs the contribution of all the local administration, and it needs a new, more effective institutional setup and legal framework. This to create a shared information platform for the urban conservation, and at the same time to involve all the actors that are participating in the city, even its inhabitants, even the people that works in the city, and that is why it's very important to launch a public awareness raising. The first step that we undertook was therefore to identify what was the historic city, what was Historic Cairo World Heritage Site. We have applied a methodology that is widely used internationally for all the identification of historic city, which was basically to take 4 major steps. We decided to take 4 according to the available cartography that was possible to retrieve in Cairo, 4 major steps of maps that document the development of the city, and we compared them. Of course, the comparison cannot occur by simple overlapping of transparent layers, because all these maps were made in different historic periods with different technique. Therefore, the comparison have to occur by observation, alley by alley, block by block. And these lead, layer by layer, overlapping the Napoleon expedition map of 1807 with the Grand Bay map of 1888, we obtained the little map here on the corner, where in blue, in high blue, is highlighted the old core of the city. In light blue, you have the renovation occurred on the old core, and in red, you have the start of the new development toward the Nile, the downtown of Khedive El Ismail. Doing this work, step by step, year by year, we reached on a base, on a map base of 2006 provided by CAPMAS, this result that shows how much of the historic urban fabric is actually still present in the Cairo of today. A huge, way bigger area than what was submitted by the government in 2004. This is the kind of comparison in detail, and this helped us in outlining a proposal for a boundary of the World Heritage Site that includes the old harbor of Bulaq with its Wakala, that includes way more than the Fatimid nucleus, because also the area of Cloth Bay as reminiscence, as presence of historic urban fabric. Fustat area, the cemeteries. And the area still El Meya Gedida, we decided to include it, even if it was a modern fabric, because it was in a kind of pocket within a wider area that was historic city. Normally, the historic analysis stop with the former Khaliq al-Masri, Port Said Street now today, the part of the historic city. But as you can see, there is much of the historic urban fabric on the other side, even if there are not many monuments, not as much as on the other side. But again, we are protecting an historic city. Here we made a comparison between the perimeters that were submitted in 2008. So in red you have the core area, and in blue a kind of buffer zone to the core area, and the perimeter that we propose, the brown, with the buffer zone that we propose, the yellow. The difference is quite consistent. We then compared our proposal with the existing Egyptian law, the one issued by the National Organization of Urban Harmony to protect the areas of peculiar value. In blue and light blue, you see the area of protection for the historic Cairo, and in orange, you see the Khedive, and yellow, the Khedive Cairo, in brown, Garden City. Within this perimeter, I would like you to understand that we are not talking of the same heritage value in an homogeneous way. It's not an anonymous mass of historic city. We have that different layer, of course, because of transformation that occurred through time, but even historic transformation. Muhammad Ali opened axis within the historic city. So this is an historic transformation that should be protected. But this urban fabric, as much as it is important, it has a different value than a fabric that is there previously and has a different integrity, therefore. We also have an archaeological area here, and we have another one in the excavation that are still ongoing of the corner of the wall in Burj Al Zafar. We have necropolis. So we try to differentiate the various typologies of urban fabric within the area. And moreover, we started a previous survey on the field that was in a quite generic but quite diffuse way assessing the heritage value on the site. We set 5 parameters: the architectural value, the street alignments, so the existence of the same path as in historic urban fabric, the plot persistence, so there has been no merging, no parceling, more or less the pattern is the same, the compactness of the fabric, there are not many demolitions occurring around, and the presence of activities, markets, craft, people. We follow all that path that you see, all the blue streets, which represent more or less in a district subdivision for each shiaka at least 4 axes, 4 streets. Generally, the main spines, historic spines have been taken into account as well, and the boundaries of shiaka, because they represent a quite nevralgic point of the urban fabric. And for each of them, we have tried to assess by grading this parameter for the architectural value, for the street alignment, for the plot persistence, for the compactness, and for the presence of activities. Each parameter gave us a map like the one you see on the side, where the darker spot have a higher integrity of the value that was assessed. In this case, you see the higher integrity of architectural value, the higher integrity of street alignment, the higher integrity of plot persistence, and the higher integrity of compactness. At last, the highest presence of activity in the site. This work was made while associate this presence of heritage value. This is the survey that you will find in the report that we will distribute after. Street by street and shiaka by shiaka was represented in this format where you have the identification of where the Shiaka is located, a small description of it and of what it was observed, and the grading system that was given that allowed to retrieve the map, and a series of explicatory photos, generally one for each street that was observed. That composed a huge archive that we have of the state of art of historic Cairo in the year 2011. This is a series of Shiaka. This is the final grading that was putting together all these 5 parameters, all the heritage values, to have a general picture within the site where I have the highest level of integrity. You can see that actually the highest level was corresponding very much to the upper part of the Fatimid nucleus and the surrounding of Al-Muaz Street. While here there has been a lot of restoration, a lot of intervention, and a huge concentration of effort from the side of the government as well. This was translated, into a map that, considering the subdivision of different urban typology, urban fabric typology that we were seeing before, masalan, the cut of Muhammad Ali along with the older fabric, the cemeteries, the archaeological areas, it overlapped the map of value that we found, and it gives actually a first zoning for historic Cairo, telling us more about the urban fabric, the diversity of the urban fabric, where is more sensitive cases that an intervention is needed immediately, what can have a more longer term program. This map was associated with a first draft of regulation that were saying, okay, in this area I have the highest concentration, for example, of activities and of architectural value, but I have a very sensitive plot modification, so I cannot, for example, have completely new intervention. I cannot allow the building to grow 5th floor on what they are now. We are in an area that has high heritage value within the World Heritage Property perimeter. A certain rule must be applied for all the building, not only the monument, because they all, as an ensemble, compose the historic urban landscape of historic Cairo. And you can see that this is the most sensitive zone, is the one that have the highest constraint, that regard the strict pattern and the alignment, the building aids, the land subdivision, the possibility of land use, the architectural guidelines, and some other features. The lower you go in the protection, subzone 1B is still quite high, the less become the restriction that you have to impose on the fabric. As you might have noticed by now, the way of dealing with Cairo is the way of dealing with the planning of a city. The same is valid for the subzone 2A. As you might notice, these are the historic opening in the city. Clock Bay Street, Muhammad Ali Street, Al-Azhar Street. They have a different integrity than the older fabric. And finally, also for the cemeteries. The cemeteries itself cannot be treated as an homogeneous urban area. It has different densities, different characteristics. There are actually residential areas, and there are areas that have prevalence of burial ground. We launched a specific sector studies with an expert, an Egyptian expert, we made the same type of survey that we did for all the core, was made for enough streets in the cemetery to have the same type of assessment and the identification of more residential area and areas instead that have a more burial and religious significance. In the same way, it cannot be that just because we are in the cemeteries, buildings can grow like mushroom. It cannot be that historic mausoleum can be demolished in favor of high-rising building. We are within the World Heritage Property boundary. Finally, the last aspect we were mentioning was this awareness campaign. So all the actors have to be involved. which means the people that live this historic building have to be aware that the place where they are living have an historic value and needs to be maintained in a certain way. There are several groups that you target when you make an awareness campaign. It is on one side at institutional level, on one side you work with the community, on one side you might work with the tourist industry. So what we created in first place was a logo for the historic city to have a kind of identity of the place. And then we made some trial of gadgets and memorabilia that could be used in promoting events in tourism industry, that could be used also in the school and in the education system. And finally, we produced also a map for the visitors where monuments and historic streets and markets and activities and mulit are mapped. And beside every picture that you see here, there is a brief information. The map is available on our website. You will see the address of the website in the report that we will distribute at the end. Is downloadable in PDF on purpose so that tourists also or people or Cairene can download their map and go around with the map in pieces. And you can navigate it with a very detailed zoom. The purpose is to spread as much as possible. The protection of the heritage occurs also very much if there is a spread awareness for the protection of it and for the management of it. We've launched a series of sector studies on the side of this work that were investigating the housing stock. Conservation project already happened in Historic Cairo to have a clear map of what was covered, where the information were concentrated, where restoration intervention eventually already happened. We studied several management and communication strategies in other World Heritage sites that are historic city. We studied the activity pattern, so we went more in detail on what this craft is, what the market are, how they use the public space, how they use the historic building, how the people that use the markets arrive and use the market itself, how they can access, how the seller access the market, how they move around with merchandise, because all these affect the urban environment, and is in this case an historic urban environment. So traffic must not hinder, must not threaten the site. We studied the cemeteries, as I was mentioning before, and the frozen asset. Otherwise said, those buildings, and there are many in historic Cairo, that are underused, that have an historic value, that are used as waste disposal, for example, that are used, by law, you need to boundary your plot size to protect your property, and therefore historic walls have been left, and within the wall has been demolished. And all these represent a great potential for the development and the management of the historic city. And then we studied some lessons learned from the UK and the previous project in Historic Cairo about projects of urban conservation. See also the Aga Khan intervention in Dar el Ahmar, and see also the intervention here on Shara al-Muaz by the Ministry of Antiquities. In the current phase, we are concentrated on a specific area of the site, and we try in this area to make an in-depth analysis that could be a sample on how to draft a conservation plan for the city. And in this area we are launching several sector studies that will give information enough to make a management proposal at also legal and institutional level on how the historic site should be managed. Why? Because there is lack of any appropriate planning, because there is presence of large derelict and dilapidated areas. That's why we choose this specific area that I'm going to talk about. There is a worsening of the environmental situation due to the vehicular circulation and the waste disposal. So what we are targeting, this sample I was talking about, we are trying to achieve a shared and comprehensive information system and to promote an effective collaboration between all the stakeholders that are responsible about the historic city, administrative level, international level. And we promote initiatives of participation and awareness raising. The area that we choose is the area that here is portrayed in gray, and is somehow bridging between a major project that occurred before that gave a picture of the historic city, the project of Ramwaz Street and Dar al-Ahmar lower, and the project of Saida Zainab that was done in cooperation with Le Maire de France by the Cairo Governorate. So there is a kind of gap between the information that we got by the project of Al-Muaz, the project of Dar al-Ahmar area, and the project of Saida Zainab, in an area that is very strategic for the historic city, because it gets to the citadel, which is a strategic inch for the whole development, the whole mobility, a visual reference for the whole historic city. There are also major monuments in the area, like Ibn Tulun Mosque, for example, like Sultan Hassan and Rifai. There is a good sample of streets of Cairo. You have the opening of Muhammad Ali that reaches the area. You have historic spine that starts from the area, Shara Tulun, Shaikun, Khalifa. You have the acts of Souq al-Salah, Dar al-Ahmar itself. You have a major square, Salah el-Din, that transformed consistently in the years from a military square to the traffic and market that is today. And you have a good presence, unfortunately, of large derelict areas. If we think of a Dar al-Labena neighborhood, if we think of Arab al-Yassar neighborhood, which has a great potential, is right below the citadel. Imagine a properly restored traditional domestic architecture at the feet of the citadel, the value that would have. If you go and visit Arab al-Yassar, I don't know if you've been there recently, the amount of demolished property is heartbreaking. We have the presence of economic activities. Dar al-Ahmar is very well known for his craft, but we have also the market of Saida Aisha, for example, which is vital for the life of many Egyptian families that live in the area. That if it's properly managed, if it's properly sustained, will allow this family to have the means to live decently and to protect the houses and the building they are living in, to send their children with a proper education, and to let them know how important is the city where they live in. Is an area also that has been occasionally interested by rehabilitation projects. The Dar al-Labena area specifically was particularly interested in the past years for tourism development, which means also that you can think in some of the assets, if properly managed, to attract investors for development, for a moderate development that respect the World Heritage Site. And is an area, as I was saying, that has never been covered by proper comprehensive studies. It embraces also all the typology of urban fabric that we have identified before in our analysis. So it gives a good sample. If we can make a sample here of our conservation plan should be done, this can be easily spread on the rest of the site, because already it covers all sorts of type of urban fabric. So what we are doing is a kind of building by building survey in the pink areas that you see numbered. 1 is Dar al-Ostra area, 2 is Dar al-Labena, 3 is Hataba, 4 is Arab al-Yassar. To study in detail the integrity of the built environment, the integrity of the streets, building by building, street by street. And for doing so, we are doing a training on the job activity with some staff of the Ministry of Antiquities, some staff of the Governorate, some staff of CAPMAS, some staff of the National Organization of Urban Harmony, some staff of the ALCAF, Ministry of Endowments, which has a huge amount of property in the historic city. And this is already an effort to try to put a shared platform, because many of the employees of this institution are doing works in parallel, but they do not share, for example, the same map. So each and every of them, it turned out that they were updating the map, the cadastral, by themselves, and they found out that actually in the other department they were doing the same, but there was not, for example, a shared way of doing it. So you end up to have also so many differentiated maps that cannot cooperate together. But by law, you understand that actually the city works as a system, as an ensemble of actors. You cannot touch, even in the restoration of Al-Muazzin Dila Street, you cannot touch the pipes without the Ministry of Infrastructure, without the Governorate of Cairo. So it is needed very much, this dialogue, and this is what we are trying to promote. Also, we are launching a study because the citadel, being a strategic inch for the city, nonetheless, nowadays, it is actually open and accessible from Salah Salem. Not like it was planned in the origin. The citadel used to belong to the historic city. Bab el-Azab was the gate for it. It was the connection. Mohammed Ali Street was cut to connect the old power siege, the citadel, with Abdin Palace, the new power. So these powerful urban interventions have been lost, and the people that live in Attaba, in Arab El Yassar, in Dar el Ostra, in Khalifa, they are actually not benefiting of the citadel anymore. They are not accessing it almost, So this kind of weakness should be addressed. And there is a huge part of the citadel, the whole part of Bab el-Azab, that has been closed for security reasons, also is partially occupied by the Ministry of Defense. So we are currently, in cooperation with great support of the Ministry of Antiquities, making detailed studies to understand the architectural assets that is present there and see how this can be reconnected once again to the historic city. And again, there is the connection that occurs by main historic spine, like Mohammed Ali Street, like Shaikun Street, in connection with Bab el-Ahmar, and so on and so forth. There are also modern urban fabric and spine that are very much suffering the stress of overloaded vehicular circulation, and this actually is a hindering and a menace for the fruition of the historic city, but for the inhabitant itself. It's nauseous and obnoxious and dangerous to access even a market inside Aisha if you have traffic that is actually running over the people that are willing to go there and buy their goods. And at the same time, the same way this traffic affects the fruition of the built environment, and it damages the monuments in itself and the housing of historic housing and modern housing that are present within the perimeter. Therefore, a picture of ensemble for it. Several studies are launched currently, parallel to this survey on the field, building by building. Studies that study the lower part of the citadel, studies for the vehicular circulation, the mobility of pedestrians and any means in this particular area of the historic city, to see also with potential modeling alternatives of circulation to preserve at best this connection of the citadel with the historic city. Studies that aim at understanding still the integrity and the potential of historic spines like Mohammed Ali Street, and studies that target the markets and the economic activity to understand how they occupy the soil, how the mobility connected to these markets, and in which way this market could be actually managed not to hinder, not to damage the environment, and not to create environmental problem. The study, the part that is done building by building, is this training on the job activity that I was mentioning before, and it analyzes buildings and street according to forms that were drafted within the project for the completion of a GIS system, Geographical Information System, that's associated to a map, information on the status and planning intention and management for the city. Here are some of your colleagues, maybe you recognize someone. and the work on the street to evaluate. You see, we are not evaluating only monument. You would never give credit to this element, but this element composed is within the historic city. How the government of Egypt should behave in front of this element that compose the urban fabric. Last but not least, we are promoting the site and knowledge of the site in the site. We've hired a consultant, Dr. Meia Librashi, who is currently making a few events in the areas where we are making the survey building by building, targeting several fringe, from the children to the adults with different awareness activities, to tackle the sense of belonging to the place, to tackle the knowledge of key cardinal points in the city, to tackle the knowledge of names of places, streets, monuments, buildings, to tackle the problem of the knowledge of the building where these people live in, that are not monuments, but they have an historic value, and they are what is left of historic Cairo. And here you see the activity that was actually yesterday afternoon in the Sabil in Dar Belostre with some kids that they learned what is a Sabil, because they were calling it Asar. It belongs to the Asar, but and it was taught to them also like how the water was running into the city, which is a fundamental element, one of the inscription, one of the elements that it is in the nomination file of Cairo, and that was not known, not taught to them. And that is it for the moment. Thank you.